Hello, I'm called Monique Ngogiri, and I'm working as a freelance journalist and blogger with an avid interest in all things news. As many of you wish through different emails that in the next blog we can cover how to determine credibility of various news sources and the article in this presentation we are going to cover how to evaluate credibility of information. In order to cover or to evaluate the credibility of news, three stories from different sources were selected. One from the New York Times called Grief and Protest Follow Shooting of the Teenager, and another from Apple called Apple Announces iPhone 6, iPhone 6 Plus, the biggest advancement in the iPhone history. Then the last story will come from the New York Times called Vacuous Assault Shake Texas Town, and those stories will be evaluated based on inverse test. Let us start by the first story called Grief and Post Follow Shooting on Teenager. The story was about a young who was shot by an officer, and it was written by Jerry Bossman and Emma Hickman in 2014. Based on the information that was provided, the source is independent and not self-interest based. This is because there was no interest behind the story, since the author was talking on behalf of general public. The information that was provided from both policeman and the family of the killed person was consulted. This is because this showed that the source was independent because there was no side supported by the author. Another criteria to base on while evaluating credibility of source is to know if the source used multiple sources versus single sources. The author used quote from mother of the killed person expressing her sadness to the policeman. On another hand, quotes from policeman where he was saying that they are still in investigation so as to know what really happened. Another criteria is verification versus assertion. This source verifies information by providing evidence to support its truth. For example, the author said that 100 of people were there when the criminal happened. In order to prove that that information happened, the author used pictures to show that those things happened. The next criteria to base on while evaluating the credibility is authoritative versus uniformed sources. Based on information covered in the article, it is clear that the author of the story was informed. This is because before writing the story, the author consulted both sides of the concerned people, to mean citizen and the policeman side. Another thing to consider while evaluating the source is to know whether the source was named versus unnamed. For this story, the source had a name and it is called the New York Times. So based on all those criteria, it is clear that this source is credible. First of all, the story is credible since it has the name of the story, which is the New York Times. According to Courage for America, named sources are considered as credible than unnamed sources. Another reason why this story is credible is that the story didn't become biased. This means that two sides are consulted in the story. It should consult all information from those sides. For this story, the author used information or evidence from both policeman and general citizen so as to serve as the evidence to his claim. So based on the evaluation from investors, it is clear that this source is credible, this story is credible since it meets all criteria of the test. Let us now move to the second article, which is called Vacuous Assault Shake Texas Town. The story was talking about an 18 years old girl who was leaked by an unknown person, and it was written by James Minnisley in 2011. Based on the coverage of the story, it is clear that the source is independent, as there was no interest behind the information that was provided. The author was talking about things that affected the general public. For example, there is somewhere he said that the policeman get involved because the video that was taken when the girl was leaked. Again, let us see if the article used multiple sources of information. The article used multiple source information to serve as evidence. For example, there is an evidence that the author provided by saying that the girl was forced to have sex with the several men, according to Houston Chronicle. This proved that the author consulted different sources so as to approve its claim. The next criteria is verification versus assertion. The source verification information provided by using evidence from different sources. For example, in order to support that the girl was raped, the author provided evidence saying that the girl was ordered to dislobe and was sexually assaulted by several boys in the bedroom and bathroom. She was told she would be beaten if she would not comply. The affected said. The next step to evaluate the credibility of this source is authoritative versus uninformed sources. Based on the information that was provided in the article, it is clear that the author got informed from all concerned people before covering the story. For example, the author said that Texas has many cases of assault. He provided evidence to support his argument. The affidavit said that the assault started after an 18-year-old boy invited a criminal to ride around his car. He took her to a house on Travis. This means that the author was sure about what he was saying. Then the last criteria to consider is to know whether the source is named or unnamed. The source is named and it is from the New York Times. So based on InverTest, we can conclude by saying that this story is credible since all criteria are met. In fact, the source of the story uses evidence from other sources to support its claim so as to avoid being biased. Again, the source was published by a well-known media called the New York Times. So let's now move to our last story, which is called Apple announced iPhone 6 Plus, the biggest advancement in iPhone history. The story is from Apple. The article was written by Natty Kellis. In order to evaluate the credibility of this source, let us use InverTest. The first criteria to consider is to know whether the source is independent versus self-interest. Referring to the information that was provided in the article, it is clear that the story is self-interested. The reason is that the story was covered as a way of advertising the new product of the company, called iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. For example, Apple said in this story that was covered to promote its new product by saying that this new product have a high download speed and is added with its high quality voice calling and Wi-Fi, and these new products are better than any other phone in the world. So this showed that there was interest behind the covering of the story. The next criteria is multiple sources versus single sources. These sources use only one source of information. For example, evidence that was provided was from the CEO of the company, where he was saying that iPhone 6 is the only phone that is there to satisfy the needs of all their customers. Even though the information comes from a different person, but still evidence comes from the same company, if you can say. Another criteria is verification versus assertion. There is no verification of information that was provided in this story. For example, Kerry said iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus is the best phone in the world with high quality voice coding. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. At least they should have written or provide a comparison between their new products with other phones that people used to have. Next is authoritative and informed versus uniformed. The story is informed as it is shown that the source demonstrates knowledge about the subject matter. The products are from Apple and it is Apple which introduced to the place. The story was covered as a play series, so players cannot get information from more unified sources. In addition, the quote from the CEO of the company was used in the story. This showed that the source was informed. Based on the evaluation, let us now conclude and see if the story is credible. First, we need to ask ourselves if the source meets all criteria of inverters. This story from Apple does not meet all criteria. Again, as it was explained before, the author has self-interest behind the coverage of the story. In addition, there was no verification of information. This means that the story is not credible. So this is the end of this video presentation, and I hope you learn many about the story, about the credibility of sources, and I hope to see you again.